Imperialism. Imperialism is a political ideology where a powerful nation seeks to dominate weaker regions or countries, often through military conquest, economic control, or cultural influence. It prioritizes expanding territory and resources to enhance national power. Historically, imperialism traces back to ancient empires like Rome, but it peaked during the 15th to 20th centuries. European powers, such as Britain and Spain, colonized vast areas in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. For example, the British Empire controlled India by the 19th century, exploiting its resources and imposing governance. Key figures like Cecil Rhodes championed imperial expansion, believing it spread civilization. Imperialism often justified itself through ideologies like the white man's burden, claiming moral duty to civilize others, though it led to exploitation, cultural erasure, and resistance movements. Economically, it fueled wealth for colonizers through trade monopolies and resource extraction, like gold and spices. However, it caused long-term harm, including poverty and instability in colonized regions. By the 20th century, anti-imperialist movements, such as India's independence struggle led by Gandhi, weakened imperial powers. Critics argue imperialism prioritizes greed over ethics, while supporters claim it spurred global connectivity. Today, imperialism persists in subtler forms, like economic dominance or cultural exports, shaping global power dynamics. Liberalism. Liberalism is a political ideology emphasizing individual freedom, equality, and democratic governance. It advocates for personal rights, free markets, and limited government intervention in daily life. Originating in the 17th and 18th centuries during the Enlightenment, liberalism challenged monarchies and rigid social hierarchies. Thinkers like John Locke argued for natural rights, life, liberty, and property, while Montesquieu pushed for separation of powers. In practice, liberalism shaped revolutions, like the American Revolution in 1776, which established democratic principles, and the French Revolution in 1789, promoting equality. By the 19th century, figures like John Stuart Mill expanded liberalism, advocating free speech and social progress. Liberalism supports capitalism, believing competition drives prosperity, but it also backs social reforms like women's suffrage or civil rights to ensure equal opportunities. For example, the U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1964 reflected liberal values. Critics argue liberalism overemphasizes individualism, neglecting community needs, or enables inequality through unchecked markets. Supporters say it fosters innovation and personal growth. Modern liberalism splits into classical liberalism, favoring minimal government, and social liberalism, supporting welfare programs. Globally, liberal democracies dominate, but challenges like populism and authoritarianism test its resilience, making it a cornerstone of contemporary political debates. Conservatism. Conservatism is a political ideology that values tradition, social stability, and gradual change over radical reform. It emphasizes preserving established institutions such as family, religion, and government, believing they provide continuity and order. Rooted in the 18th century, conservatism emerged as a response to rapid changes from the French Revolution. Edmund Burke, a key figure, argued for cautious progress, respecting historical wisdom. In practice, conservatism shaped policies like Britain's gradual expansion of voting rights in the 19th century, balancing tradition with reform. Conservatives often support limited government, free markets, and strong national identity, as seen in Ronald Reagan's policies in the 1980s, which prioritized economic deregulation and traditional values. However, conservatism varies globally. European conservatives may back monarchies, while American conservatives focus on individual liberties and constitutional fidelity. Critics argue it resists necessary change, perpetuating inequalities, like opposition to early civil rights reforms. Supporters claim it protects societal cohesion and proven systems. For example, Margaret Thatcher's leadership in the UK emphasized traditional economic discipline. Modern conservatism faces challenges from populist movements, but it remains influential, advocating for cultural heritage and prudent governance in debates over immigration, morality, and economic policy, shaping stable societies worldwide. Socialism. Socialism is about collective well-being, emphasizing shared resources and reducing inequality. It pushes for government or community control of key industries, like healthcare or utilities, to ensure everyone benefits, not just the rich. Socialists argue wealth gaps harm society and want systems like universal healthcare or free education. The idea took shape in the 19th century with thinkers like Karl Marx, who saw capitalism exploiting workers. Early socialists like Robert Owen built cooperative communities. Unlike communism, socialism often works within democracy, seeking reform, not revolution. It values fairness, but critics warn it can stifle innovation by limiting individual incentives. Socialism's influence is growing, especially among younger people who see capitalism failing them. Think student debt or unaffordable housing. It pushes for policies like wealth taxes or Medicare for all to level the playing field. In places like Scandinavia, democratic socialism blends free markets with strong welfare systems, inspiring advocates. Critics argue it risks inefficiency or higher taxes that hurt growth, but supporters say it creates fairness and security. From Bernie Sanders to global movements, socialism sparks debate about balancing individual freedom with collective needs. Anarchism. Anarchism is a political ideology advocating the abolition of all forms of hierarchical authority, including the state, to create a society based on voluntary cooperation and mutual aid. It rejects centralized power, believing individuals and communities can self-govern without coercion. Emerging in the 19th century, anarchism was shaped by thinkers like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who declared property is theft, and Mikhail Bakunin, who opposed Marxist state socialism. The Paris Commune of 1871 briefly showcased anarchist principles with decentralized governance. Anarchism inspired movements like the Spanish Civil War's anarchist collectives in the 1930s, led by figures like Emma Goldman, who championed individual freedom and social equality. Critics argue anarchism is impractical, risking chaos without authority. Supporters highlight its emphasis on liberty and grassroots organization. Communism. Communism is a political ideology advocating a classless, stateless society where all property and resources are communally owned, aiming to eliminate inequality and exploitation. It envisions collective control of production, with wealth distributed based on need. Originating in the 19th century, communism was formalized by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the Communist Manifesto, 1848, which called for a proletarian revolution to overthrow capitalist systems. Vladimir Lenin applied these ideas in the 1917 Russian Revolution, establishing the Soviet Union, a key communist state. Mao Zedong later adapted it in China's 1949 revolution, emphasizing peasant-led communism. In practice, communist regimes often centralized power, as seen in Joseph Stalin's authoritarian policies, leading to state-controlled economies and suppression of dissent. Critics argue communism ignores human incentives, citing economic stagnation in the Soviet Union before its 1991 collapse. Supporters claim it addresses capitalist inequities, pointing to Cuba's healthcare system. Historical attempts at communism, like the Paris Commune of 1871, were short-lived but influential. Modern communism is rare but persists in nations like North Korea. Debates focus on its feasibility versus its tendency toward authoritarianism, with figures like Che Guevara symbolizing its revolutionary spirit, shaping global discussions on equality and power. Capitalism. Capitalism is a political and economic ideology centered on private ownership of production and resources, driven by market competition and individual initiative. It prioritizes profit, innovation, and personal freedom over collective control. Emerging in the 16th century with the rise of mercantilism, capitalism solidified during the Industrial Revolution. Adam Smith, in his 1776 work, The Wealth of Nations, championed free markets, arguing competition fosters prosperity. The 19th century U.S. saw rapid capitalist growth, with industrialists like John D. Rockefeller dominating oil and rail. Capitalism fueled global trade and technological advances, such as the steam engine and later Silicon Valley's tech boom. Supporters, like Milton Friedman, praise its efficiency and wealth creation, pointing to post-World War II economic booms in Western nations. Critics argue it widens inequality and prioritizes profit over social good, citing the 2008 financial crisis. Capitalism varies. Laissez-faire in the U.S. contrasts with regulated models in Germany. Today, capitalism dominates globally, but faces scrutiny over wealth imbalance and environmental costs, driving debates on balancing profit with social responsibility in modern economies. Populism. Populism is a political ideology that champions the people against a perceived elite, often emphasizing popular grievances and direct representation. It thrives on distrust of institutions, portraying elites, political, economic, or cultural, as corrupt. Emerging in the 19th century, populism took shape in movements like the U.S. People's Party in the 1890s, which rallied farmers against bankers and railroads. In the 20th century, leaders like Argentina's Juan Perón mobilized workers against oligarchs. Populism can be left-wing, like Hugo Chávez's redistribution policies in Venezuela, or right-wing, like Donald Trump's anti-establishment campaigns. It often relies on charismatic figures, such as Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro, who frame issues in simple us versus them terms. Critics argue populism undermines democracy by oversimplifying complex issues and fostering division, as seen in Brexit's 2016 campaign. Supporters view it as empowering the marginalized, giving voice to those ignored by elites. Historically, populism surged during economic crises, like the Great Depression, and continues today in response to globalization's disruptions. While it drives political engagement, its rejection of expertise and institutions can lead to polarization. Progressivism. Progressivism is a political ideology advocating for social, political, and economic reforms to address inequalities and modernize society through active government intervention. It emphasizes equality, justice, and adapting to changing times. Emerging in the late 19th century during the Progressive era in the US, it responded to industrialization's challenges like labor exploitation and urban poverty. Figures like Theodore Roosevelt pushed for trust-busting and consumer protections, while Jane Addams advanced social welfare through settlement houses. The 1913 introduction of the income tax and women's suffrage in 1920 were progressive victories. Globally, progressivism influenced reforms like Britain's welfare state under Clement Attlee. It supports policies like universal health care, environmental protection, and civil rights, as seen in the 1960s US under leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. Critics argue progressivism overreaches with government power, risking inefficiency, as seen in debates over the New Deal's costs. Supporters praise its focus on fairness, citing advancements like marriage equality in 2015. Today, progressives like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez champion climate action and wealth taxes. Progressivism remains dynamic, addressing modern issues like technology's impact and systemic racism, driving debates on balancing reform with practicality in democratic societies worldwide. Fascism. Fascism is a far-right political ideology emphasizing authoritarian rule, nationalism, and suppression of dissent to unify society under a single leader or state. It rejects democracy and individualism, prioritizing collective loyalty to the nation or race. Emerging in early 20th century Europe, fascism gained prominence under Benito Mussolini, who established a totalitarian regime in Italy in 1922. Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany, starting in 1933, exemplified its extreme form, promoting racial supremacy and militarism. Fascist regimes centralized power, controlled media, and crushed opposition, as seen in Spain under Francisco Franco. Propaganda, like Nazi Germany's rallies, glorified the state, while economic policies blended state control with private enterprise. Fascism fueled aggressive expansion, leading to World War II's devastation. Critics condemn its brutality and human rights abuses, citing the Holocaust's genocide. Supporters, historically limited, saw it as a bulwark against communism and disorder. Post-1945, fascism largely collapsed, but neo-fascist movements persist, often tied to ultranationalism. Figures like Oswald Mosley in Britain kept fascist ideas alive post-war. Today, fascism's legacy warns against authoritarianism, with debates on its influence in modern nationalist movements, shaping discussions on democracy, power, and individual freedoms globally. Libertarianism. Libertarianism is a political ideology emphasizing individual liberty, minimal government, and free market economics. It advocates for personal freedom in social and economic spheres, opposing state intervention unless it protects basic rights like life, liberty, and property. Emerging in the 18th century, libertarian ideas were shaped by John Locke's natural rights philosophy, and later by 20th century thinkers like Ayn Rand, who championed individualism. The U.S. Libertarian Party, founded in 1971, formalized its presence, with figures like Ron Paul promoting non-interventionist foreign policy and tax cuts. Libertarianism influenced policies like deregulation under Ronald Reagan. It supports free speech, gun rights, and decriminalization of drugs, as seen in debates over marijuana legalization. Critics argue it overlooks social inequalities and public goods, citing underfunded infrastructure. Supporters praise its emphasis on personal responsibility, pointing to entrepreneurial success in Silicon Valley. Historically, libertarian ideas resonated in 19th century classical liberalism, but gained modern traction against growing bureaucracies. Today, libertarians like Elon Musk advocate for reduced government in technology and space exploration. The ideology shapes debates on privacy, taxation, and state overreach, appealing to those prioritizing individual autonomy. Republicanism. Republicanism is a political ideology advocating governance through elected representatives in a system prioritizing civic virtue and the common good over monarchy or direct democracy. It emphasizes rule of law, checks and balances, and citizen participation. Rooted in ancient Rome's republic, it was revived during the Renaissance and Enlightenment by thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli and Montesquieu, who stressed separated powers. The 1776 American Revolution, led by figures like Thomas Jefferson, embedded republicanism in the U.S. Constitution, creating a representative government with checks like the Electoral College. In France, the 1789 Revolution established a republic, influenced by Jean-Jacques Rousseau's ideas of popular sovereignty. Republicanism rejects hereditary rule, as seen in the abolition of monarchies in Germany post-1918. Critics argue it can favor elites, citing early U.S. voting restrictions, while supporters highlight its stability, as in Switzerland's enduring republic. Figures like Abraham Lincoln reinforced Republican ideals by preserving the Union. It drives debates on democratic accountability and civic duty, shaping governance in nations balancing representation with authority, while facing challenges from populism and polarization in contemporary politics.